So we have a good group up here that's going to talk about the lab and different lab results and some of the things that we think about when we're trying to know what the process is or trying to modulate a process or trying to make sure that we have a formulation that's what we think it is, and so it's safe, effective, and meets all the criteria on a label, for example. But it's also earlier than that, looking at the process. And some of the things that you read about, or if you're looking up on Facebook or something out, and some of the things that you hear are all labs suck, and they all give the wrong answer. I sent it out to 4 different labs. I got 6 different answers. And it wasn't the answer that I wanted. And then why do I have to pay for that? Why can't I just, write down something and falsified results? And you see people that are making stuff up. There was the one in Oregon where the mass spec wasn't working, so the guy just continued to put in false data. And I think we both know him too, don't we? So now he's up in another place. And so when you look at that, he just felt compelled. A laboratory process. So the first thing I'd like to do is have the panelists introduce themselves, as well as some of their expertise in this part and some of the things that they're seeing for this panel. So I'll start with Ryan.
Hi, I'm Ryan Shore with Big Sky Scientific. We're a processor. We take in hemp and make CBD. If you've heard of us, it's probably from the Idaho case. We got a truck seized in 2018 and sued the government. So if we're familiar, it's probably from that. But as far as testing goes, I've been involved as a consumer of testing. I've also been an internal customer of internal testing procedures. I've had a HPLC since 2015. I actually had a really nice Waters HPLC that really didn't do anything for me until at all. It was a really terrible investment. Now I have a Shimatsu HPLC that's not as nice, but I have a really highly skilled operator and chemist, which is Catherine. And we get awesome results, and that machine's super productive for us. So I learned you can't spend enough money to make that solution work out. And then I send in a lot of stuff for testing of hemp, of CBD, and I've experienced a lot of stuff. And I also talk to a lot of customers, so I get their feedback.
Good morning. My name's Richard Sams. I'm the scientific director for KCA Laboratories in Kentucky. My professional experience is as a professor of veterinary pharmacology, and more recently I've been involved with cannabis testing, and look forward to the discussion we're going to have this morning.
Hi, I'm Catherine Spory, and as Ryan said, I'm the lab director at Big Sky Scientific, so I'm in charge of the quality control for our product, sending out our samples for third-party testing as well as our internal testing.
Hi, I'm Megan McCormick. I got my PhD in chemistry, but my testing experience comes from working at OSHA, which is a compliance testing laboratory for, obviously, OSHA. And it's an ISO 17025 accredited.
Laboratories commercial director. Before I was at KCA, I spent 10 years in the dietary supplement industry with a testing laboratory and running certification programs and auditing GMP facilities. So yeah, looking forward to it.
So we put the Ryans on the back, we sandwiched them. They're the bread. And the first Ryan, of course, gave me a little tease on the fact that I had 29 years at Waters Corporation making liquid chromatographs. But I got out on good behavior, so I was okay. When you're looking at the laboratory, there's a couple of things that that we want to discuss. One is the commercial laboratory that you send material out that's qualified to be able to look at the CBD, and so you have a certificate of authorization, so or making sure that you actually have that COA that allows you to have a product or to ship a product across Iowa or some other place and not be stopped. And the other part is internal testing, where you're wanting to make sure that your in-house process is going well and that you know what it's doing without having to send it out. But at the same time, you're wanting to have results that are able to be reliable, so that when you do send out the COA, it's more of a clarification, or you already know that those results are. And so we have different panelists on that side. One of the things that we look at, and that is, what's a 17025 laboratory? And maybe I'll push it to the far Ryan. Was it Ryan Donald, or was it?
Balone.
No, I meant your middle name.
Michael. My middle name, yeah.
Yeah. There you go. So we'll call him Michael. And so on the 17025, what kind of things did you guys have to go through to get that?
Yeah, it was a lot of very late nights to prepare for the audit and everything. But basically, ISO 17025 is a quality accreditation that you receive from a third-party auditing company or accreditation company, basically ensuring that your quality systems ensure reproducibility and validity of test results through standard operating procedure creation that controls the processes that are within the laboratory, as well as SOPs, and trained to use the equipment and review data, can continue to have the same results over and over. And yeah, so a lot of people have this misconception that it's ensuring that your methods are suitable for the analysis of the material that you're testing. While you do have to show the validation of your procedures, a lot of times the data isn't reviewed by the auditor. It's just ensuring that you do have a valid method. It's not so much ensuring that you're doing it the best way possible.
So I'll do a follow-up on that one, and that is, when you see an accredited 17025 label on a laboratory that you're submitting your sample to, does that mean that all of the applications are applicable based on that?
No, I mean, when you get the accreditation, you get it for a scope that you apply for. So you really need to check the accreditation certificate of the laboratory to understand exactly what they're accredited for.
So they might have one for potency, but they may not have an ICP-MS where they have 17025 for the ICP-MS doing heavy metals. So you could have a 17025 for potency on a liquid chromatograph, but in the same laboratory, you're not accredited on the ICP-MS.
Yeah, that's true. And there's also some accreditation bodies allow for third-party validation. So some laboratories will just take a validated method that's created by maybe an instrument manufacturer and apply it to their own processes and declare it validated through third-party means.
Then one that I would do on a follow-up, and that is, when you're doing that in a laboratory, there's different parts of a test that are part of that validation. And part of it is, if you have a pipette, that pipette has to be certified by an outside certification laboratory that it's actually delivering that amount of material. And that's, I believe it's it's at least once a year.
Yeah, it's at least once a year. Yeah, it's actually ISO 17025 as well. It's a calibration accreditation instead of a testing accreditation.
And the second one is the analytical balance. And then the other one is the person who's doing the test has been certified to do that test. And so it's more than just one thing. So when you see a 17025 and you're sending out the laboratory and you go to 4 different laboratories, that doesn't mean that the laboratory you've chosen can do that test, or that human has been calibrated to do that test also.
Yeah.
So it always asks the question, I guess, would be the typical thing. When you're looking at the most difficult tests, or you're looking at clarification, where do you see some of the challenges as a user, other Ryan? And you're Donald on the middle name, right?
Ryan Donald Shore.
Okay, so I'm sure you get questions. So on your side as a user, what are you looking for in a laboratory?
So when it comes to laboratory, basically we have a kind of a bless off, right? So we basically create our own batches, we do our own testing, and we send out our stuff. And there's a couple different things that we're looking for. We want a potency number. That said, the potency number that I look at is in a range. When I do an isolate product, for instance, I understand that the HPLC is not a tool that's it's not meant to be so precise that we will know reliably if it's like 99.9 or 99.8. So I have a lot of customers that will ask, for a specific COA number as a deliverable. And I let all of my customers know if they want a specific number like that, then it's really simple. I'll get you that number because I'll send in my very pure product and I'll have them retest it 5 times until it says the exact number you want. But that's the only way you actually get a 99.9 versus a 99.8. In general, what I'm looking for when I send it in for HPLC is if it's above 98%, that's within a range of like very good purity. So that's where I look at when I'm talking about like potency. And I'm not trying to like cheat the system. Or I'm saying is like it's a kind of a window when you have potency. So it's like mostly pure. Then from there, I'm looking at what's not in there. That's really what I care about. I want to make sure there's not any kind of solvents, right? So whatever solvent that we're using, so in our final stage crystallization, we're using pentane. So I want to make sure that there's basically very, very, very low levels of pentane. And then we'll look at everything else, we go through a full panel, and a lot of the stuff I sort of just know is not going to be in there. We know there's not going to be mold in there or microbials and all that. We know there's not going to be heavy metals, but we want to run those tests and just make sure. And that's the most powerful thing about it is like make sure that any of the stuff that we're looking for is just not in there.
So as far as your internal chemist, what does she have to say as far as what she has to do to make sure,
Sorry.
make sure you're happy?
So those number variations that Ryan was talking about comes down to the method variability of all of these testing assays. And that becomes kind of problematic with these high purity isolates. So if you have a acceptable method variability of 5%, that's going to impact those high purity isolates more than the lower potency numbers. And that's why when we're talking about 0.1%, that's what Ryan was getting at. And I agree with him. COAs are really, really necessary for confirming what is not in your product. You want to confirm that you don't have any dangerous solvents or pesticides, anything residual from the process, even foreign material screening to make sure that there's no metals from your process that made it into your isolate. And on the internal side, a lot of my job is that we go into our third-party testing requests kind of with a bead on what we're expecting. And that's really, really helpful because a lot of third-party testing labs have popped up as a service to the hemp and the cannabis industry, but they purchased their method from another lab, and they're certified by purchasing that method from another lab, and they're not necessarily operating with a skilled chemist on their staff. They're just rinse and repeat testing as they were taught to do by the person that came in for 2 hours that installed the HPLC. And so that's been, having internal testing for us has been really integral in finding which labs we are willing to work with, who has people on staff that know what they're talking about. And it's really key for us for screening our third-party testing labs. And that's really, really important, because you can see all the stickers, but they might just have somebody that got, a day of training and is rinse and repeating, and they don't know when they look at the data how to see something that's abnormal or unacceptable. They're just pushing out the COAs, and that's the danger, and that's why our internal testing is so important to our process.
So I'll do the quick audience thing. How many people didn't know that the fact that you can have a laboratory, but they bought the test from someone who's accredited. So now I've started my own McDonald's. I bought my lease, and then I don't know how. I've now got a hot dog cooker cooking my hamburgers, and that's the part that's more difficult. My fries are a little limpy and oily, and that's the part that comes around. So when you're looking at that, that's why you want to go visit a lab yourself. And if a laboratory doesn't want to show you their SOPs, that's a problem. So that's your first warning flag of, oh my gosh, if you're 17025, it's an information that I should see. And the other one I've had when I've had customers that I've worked with, laboratories will call up the farmer and say, I know that why are you wanting to see the actual liquid chromatograph? And they're going, you just don't understand it. We've given you the numbers. And so that's the one that sends me over the edge, because I usually don't call them up, because that's a bad thing for me overall. And so I usually have the customer, I says, I want to see that chromatogram. And typically what I'll see is a little thing on the side, just because I've seen chromatograms since 1972, not 1968, but only since 1972. I can tell immediately that there's something else under there. And I can tell immediately from the integration that there's something wrong with the instrument. It's a quaternary solvent, and something's leaking in, and it's not giving the answer, but someone just wrote it in there. I have yes, sir, question.
So on your third-party data, what quality control packages do you request so that you can validate that the data is any good? Are you particularly on your making sure that you have not false negatives, particularly because you're not looking for adulterates? And what uncertainties do you accept? I mean, do you guys have internal criteria for your third-party laboratories?
I would say one of the most powerful tools I have for screening a third-party laboratory is I send them spiked samples. So I like to be real sneaky, and I send them a sample and I say, oh, this is a 98% isolate, and I know that it's only 90% because I've created it to be that way. And I will get COAs back that say 99.9 or things like that. And those are big red flags. Or I'll send a sample that I know has solvent in it, and I'll see, what do I get, and that's really a good way. And then also just requesting a meeting with their technical team is really important, because you can pretty quickly understand if they kind of know what they're talking about or not. I suppose I do have a slight bias that I know what I'm talking about, and I know that can be difficult for a processor or for a business if you don't have the chemical background and the testing background. You're probably sitting there saying, I don't even know what to ask these people. Or if they provide me with information, I don't even know how to judge if it's accurate. A really good sign is if these labs are even willing to sit down and meet with you and have these technical meetings. I've had a couple of labs that I start asking technical questions, and then they just stop talking to me. and so asking to see the raw data, asking to see the chromatograms, even just asking them questions of, oh, can you provide me with when your instruments were last calibrated, when they were last serviced? If they're happy to provide that information to you, it means it's because it's easy for them to give it to you. If they really don't want to give it to you, it might be because they don't have it.
So do you ask for like level 3, level 4 quality control batches? Do you get batch QC with your data so that you can see blank data
I have asked for that before. I don't ask for that unless I see a specific issue with some of the test results. So, um, most common, I ask for that with residual solvent testing, if something comes up, because that's an issue if they're not cleaning their instrument well, and that's where I see that being a problem. And if they can provide me that information, that's something that makes me happy, and that's what I look for.
I mean, one indicator, and this is something that I've seen, like once you do business with a lab and you have a decent amount of volume going, if you call like the owner or the sales department and you tell them that you think something is wrong, and they say, "Well, what do you think the test is?" and then you just get it back that way, that's actually a pretty good barometer.
I would add with the chromatograms, we put the chromatogram on every COA just to give that information up front. We think being transparent wins us business and gains trust with our clients. But when you see a chromatogram and there's clear coelution with the analytes that you're testing, that should have been a red flag for the analyst to go back and do extra work on the sample instead of report it as is. So one problem in this industry that I continue to see is people not seeing the testing through to completion or understanding the various techniques that can be used to resolve the coelution and properly identify cannabinoids. Unfortunately, there's plenty of them that we don't have standards for, as we've talked about. But yeah, we're working towards it.
Well, the trouble is we talked about it in the last panel, so now we have to talk about it here. So, Sam, you go through your.
KCA Laboratories has acquired as many cannabinoid standards as we've been able to find, and I think Ryan told the previous panel that we have something like 38. But we're always encountering new challenges. We see peaks in chromatograms that don't match up with any of the cannabinoid standards that we have. We see these in particular with synthetic products produced by isomerization of CBD. There are multiple peaks in those chromatograms that are unidentified at this point. We've identified a couple of them. And by making those identifications and using what are called orthogonal techniques, that is, techniques that are based, chromatographic techniques in particular, that are based upon different chemical principles, we've been able to show that a standard HPLC analysis that is suitable for the determination of cannabinoids in plant material is totally unsuitable for the determination of these byproducts resulting from the acid-catalyzed isomerization of delta 8, of CBD to produce delta 8. And in fact, there are two side reactions, side products, that co-elute with delta 8 and delta 9 on the standard HPLC analysis. So the use of a method in an application for which it's not properly validated is totally inappropriate, and we see it all the time.
So the fact that you have coelution means that you have my analogy. I'm an analogist. I made that up this morning around 4 a.m. And what happens is you have two people right in front of each other, but you can't tell that I'm behind you unless I'm taller. I had to work on that a little bit. So you have two people, and then as you do another method and you say, okay, I want to look over on this side, then you can see there's two people. So I'm going to put words in your mouth, even though it's probably not appropriate. So if you're running an HPLC method at 4, so you have an acidic method, and then you run another pH at 10, then you're going to have different distribution of those molecules. So when you're at pH 11, you're going to have all the neutrals come off, and then you have the acids. At the other one, you have a mixture of stuff. So now that peak identification is going to be different. So now you can start to see if there is someone behind or in front, or you do a GC method, or you do a normal phase, and And that's how you know, that's the orthogonal method when you're dealing with something that you're making an assumption is okay, and then you're kind of suspecting something. And that's the years of that's the years of a science doing that type of work. That makes sense. And that's why you're seeing companies saying that this is pure, because they don't have a way of looking at the orthogonal or suspecting the orthogonal. With Megan, because I want to make sure that you are able to talk. And so one of the things that Megan's been working with is developing in-house analytics from scratch. So she works with a company that is consulting to start everything from scratch, all the way from extraction, from cultivation to extraction to formulation. And then typically the challenges that she has seen is when you move towards having an in-house analytics, first of all, they have to hire the right chemist, but then it's they're not knowing all the other parts that are coming with that. So when she puts in her drawing with lovely boxes where things are, they sometimes go, what's this box over here called hood? So things like that. So if you could talk a little bit about the challenges you're seeing.
Yeah, so when I do processing and manufacturing facility designs, a lot of people obviously just focus on the extraction equipment or their drying rooms or anything like that, but they don't realize how much space testing equipment actually takes up, not just, these small these days HPLCs or a larger ICP mass spec. But you have to actually have fume hoods. A lot of people don't realize that a lot of these solvents are volatile and invisible, and you can breathe them in, and they're toxic. So I worked for OSHA, and I actually tested those samples that people were breathing in at their workplace. So when people use pentane for their crystallization, some of them don't even bother wearing a volatile organic cartridge. Or they don't use a fume hood, or when people use a simple TLC test because that's what they can afford because they're a hemp farmer, and that's fine, but they think that they can just do that inside of their kitchen. But, you're working with chloroform, you're working with things that have low permissible exposure limits, and so you have to realize that you're breathing that in every day for many hours. And it's not just short-term effects of, oh, I feel a little dizzy. It's long-term effects. It's neurological effects. So you just have to realize that safety is a big part of creating these labs, not just for testing purposes, but also in your facility for extraction. So don't just only focus on extraction equipment, but the testing part too. You have to build a mini lab, which requires refrigeration, flammable explosive liquids cabinets with the proper ventilation for that, fume hoods that have to have a certain evacuation velocity. Also with GMP facilities, you have to have no cross-contamination from your lab space because you're not making products in your lab, you're just testing them. But you can contaminate whatever is in your lab space in your processing space if you have GMP certification. So yeah, there's just a lot of safety features to think about. A lot of people ignore in this industry.
So when you solve, when you have solvents, and you got to have solvents that come in, you have to have solvents that go out. You only are allowed so much solvent at any point in time, which solvent you have. And as Megan would say, if you really want to take care of your family, just do the chloroform in your kitchen. But ether actually works a lot quicker.
Yeah.
It's not as traceable. So if you're trying to get rid of the dog and then go, I can't believe Fido's dead, that's the part that you would want to work through. Or the cat.
No.
Not that there's anything wrong with cats.
No.
So you have, there must be some questions. Yes, ma'am.
I run the in-house analytics for a extraction company about 30 minutes up north. And I feel that there's a lot of variability amongst standards for different cannabinoids from multiple places. So you can go to, Cayman or ResTech, or there's multiple, like, bunch of
Cerulean,
different.
any, yeah.
Cerulean, right. So what do you guys do to vet out the standards and the company that you're buying your standards from to make sure that they truly are as pure as what they say they are, and they actually are the isolated compound that's on the label?
Can I ask a quick follow-up? And that is, when you open up the ampule, how soon are you using it?
So I use mine like the same day that I'm opening it.
Yeah.
And then I get about 2 uses out of it.
Yeah.
And then after that, I trash it.
Yeah, it's trashed on its own, but you throw it away. But
Yeah.
yeah, it's just bad joke. All right.
My preference, whenever possible, is to obtain standards from 2 sources and to compare them. Now, that's not always possible, but that's my preference.
The other one I would say is, if you're doing a calibration, are you doing a 6-point or just 3-point, 5-point? Of course, I'd be wrong. That would be an odd answer, so to speak. So I like to amuse myself. So if I go back through and I'm looking at the 5-point, then it's how you're doing that 5-point. But when I will say, when I was at Waters, we would buy from, they were not 100%. And then the second part is not buying multiple compounds in one standard. That's the other problem. So have you seen the same thing? They're nodding. So if you can't see them nodding, they're doing this.
Yeah. We purchase individual standards, and we definitely look for CRMs instead of just RMs. They're not always available, but definitely pay the extra money for certified reference material.
So I think that's what I was going to follow up on. Since we're working from a standpoint of ISO 17025, are you on all your cannabinoids? Are you getting reference standards from Schedule 34? Are your reference providers also ISO certified?
Yeah, they should be. I mean, when we do audit them, yeah, part of the vendor approval of a standard supplier, you have to ensure what accreditations they have. So yeah, I guess beyond that, when under ISO 17025, you're supposed to use CRMs when they're available, but if they're not available, using the next best thing is considered, best practice.
A different lot,
Yeah.
different lot number.
Megan said a different lot number.
So then in your methods, do you calibrate with primary and do your QC with a secondary standard from a different lot, a different vendor?
Yes, whenever possible.
And then as you're moving towards some of the other cannabinoids, so let's say we're just talking about the CBD, that's fairly easy or fairly common to get. But then you start to go to CBL, and you start to go to THCP, and you start to go to CBDP, and you start to go to all these other ones that you're trying to get information on, or you might be trying to get information on. That's the part that becomes more problematic. I mean, then you have to go to a laboratory that's got purification equipment that's having to make their own standards, and that's a part all on its own. Other questions? I'm going to prompt a question, and that is, why do you always give the wrong answer? I mean, I send a laboratory result out all the time, and I never get the right answer.
Well, I guess I'll talk a little bit about uncertainty. We have obviously every laboratory has measurement uncertainty applied to the analytes that are being tested. We've been consulting a number of our clients on internal method development for their own testing, and the most recent one that we went to, they were actually using pipettes to measure out 10 milliliters by collecting 1 milliliter at a time. And each of those steps has its uncertainty that adds up over time. And of course, towards the end, they end up with greater uncertainty than is actually necessary. So yeah, it's kind of bad. But But yeah, there's all kinds of, if you think about testing in terms of all these uncertainty points, there's always measurement. You can call it measurement error with like instruments and glassware and the standards that you're using and the personnel differences and just you know how they're feeling that day, if they really want to be precise or not. So considering all of that, you should, if the value that's being given plus or minus the measurement uncertainty falls within your expectations, you should consider it at least suitable testing. But we're always trying to get more and more precise.
And it's appropriate for the precision that you're looking for.
I want to touch just a little bit about uncertainty from like a commercial. When I spend crazy amounts of money on it, right? So in the beginning, when I was purchasing hemp, we'd end up in these kind of situations where, like, how good is this hemp, right? And so everybody says, well, their hemp is 10%, right? So basically what you have is a lot of variables that go into this business decision. But let's just say we have a perfectly representative sample of the entire farmed lot. And we have an HPLC test that says it is 10% hemp. And let's just say I'm about to spend $2 million. So just I want to give everybody an idea of what this uncertainty means when you actually apply business to it. Now that up or down by 1%, and really I would say just from a business standpoint, I give it 2%. If it's a 10% report, I say it could be 8, it could be 12. That's kind of what I operate in. So if you look at how big of a difference that makes, that's a swing of $400,000 up or down in value as to what I am purchasing in. Now, I knew a lot of extractors, and I heard them tell this story, and there's some truth to it, but the story that, like, every hemp extracts different, and it's just because it's Mother Nature and how it came out of the earth, and it's the this or the that, So you just never know how it's really going to go. But what I found is that the reliability of how much CBD we got out of hemp went up when we went from taking one test to like 100 tests and then using an average. And I'm not into math. I didn't do a lot of it, but I understand you take more percentages and you get more accurate by a lot. So that's kind of the when it comes to this uncertainty, I see this happen in a lot of different businesses. In marijuana and other things, they come up with a number on their recipe, and then they go ahead and make $40,000 worth of products, trusting that one number with hundreds of thousands of dollars or even like millions of dollars. And then they're very surprised to see that the multiplied inaccuracy caused a really bad business decision to be made. So the biggest problem that I see as a customer that I had to cope with is the fact that, like, these numbers are not as accurate as I want them to be, no matter how bad I want it.
And it's a little bit of the Tootsie Roll Pop analogy. So when I'm looking at, I looked at, I did that same thing for a customer. So they wanted me to go look at their 2 million pounds of super sacks from 2 years ago. Okay. So you go to this place and you're looking at all these super sacks and you're just going, oh my God. And they said, if you just take a couple readings, that would be good. I'm saying, well, as long as you're paying me for doing a couple readings, that's fine too. But I said, you're really going to want to take a lot of different things and look at where the bags are. Some had a little rip in them. Some still had, were secured. And I'm just like, and then you take it from the outside of the bag, and the outside of the bag too much THC on the outside. You have to go inside the Tootsie Roll Pop to get to the chewy center. And so therefore it's not only, it's the 100 of what you're taking from different distributions. So if you're buying material and they have 2 million wow, that's on the. Could we just sit down and do just a little more math? And so that's how they were. That's how they did it, though. Whew.
I think when we were talking before the panel, we were talking about the differences between laboratories, and a lot of laboratories, have the same Shimatsu HPLC. So you're really working with the same equipment, and the differences come with the personnel and the knowledge of the people that are working in the laboratory. Extraction efficiencies during sample prep can make a difference between having a CBD number of 10% or a CBD number of 12% at a different laboratory. And when we're pricing everything by the point in this industry, I think it's worthwhile to spend a bit more money on quality testing to ensure that you get those extra 2 points and that much more money. I think time and time again, I'm seeing many laboratories try to do things very quickly when the instrument has to be run for a given amount of time. Rushing sample prep to just get the injection on, can be detrimental to somebody's the value of somebody's material that they are testing. So I'd like to see the industry do more to standardize the methods across laboratories. And a lot of people think ISO 17025 is the answer, but the industry needs to come together to set methods that are appropriate for the matrix being analyzed. Too many of these methods are applied just to plants, and then it ends up being the same method for isolate, and then the same method for distillate. And as Dr. Sams touched on, it's just it's simply put, it's just sometimes the wrong method for the matrix.
So my analogy, because I live in the world of pictures, take a big bag of M&Ms. Out. So you haven't got all the M&Ms out. So you don't know if the reds and the greens or all the other ones are in the right ratio. And so the greens are taking a little bit of time. And what if there's peanut M&Ms in that M&M bag? So now you have a mixture of M&Ms, and you pour those out. And that's my word picture for why the extraction has to be. You want to get them all out. That's representative. To have the reds from the blues, because that's what you're quantitating. That's chromatography. But the chromatography is only going to give you the answer of what you inject. It's not making up stuff. I mean, even waters couldn't make up stuff. Sorry, that was my quick jab. So I had a question way in the back first, and then I'll come forward.
Hello. I grew here in Indianapolis last year and have spent, in my opinion, too much on testing. I've tested so many times in the field for the state and after the products and yada, yada. And I hear, just because you could grow this, I don't know, cherry blossom was a kind of an important strain here, cultivar, what have you. And I hear that they can have different results depending on the soil, the climate, the whatever other factors. I'm just curious, since you guys are kind of a testing expert, I mean, have you noticed any different kind of cannabinoids or different rares or any kind of differences in the plant material that you're testing based upon region, Oregon, California, Indiana, Florida?
No, really not. Getting through growing is CBG, and there are CBG strains, but so far there are not great other strains. And for you and anybody else that's a farmer, if you have any other, if I can help you out in any way when this is over, we can chat, because there's probably a lot of stuff I could talk about really specific to that world. But there's basically there's good CBG strains, there's good CBD strains, and then from there, I don't know that there's any variability regionally.
So
does that answer the question?
So Ryan Donald buys enormous amount of material all around the United States, correct? And
Yes.
so he would see that. He would be someone who would see that variability and then Dr. Sam and Ryan Michael would be able to see samples that they've got in. They can't tell you what those samples were, but do you see any variability on your side, Dr. Sam, as far as what you're seeing, or Ryan, Michael?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say the number one thing, I guess, controlling what we get is the actual sampling of the material, especially on the regulation side. In Kentucky, they go in and cut off 8 inches off the top. In Wisconsin, I know at least last year they were taking 2 inches off 15 different plants, and then you're supposed to homogenize and sample from there. When we were testing material for Massachusetts, we would get all this really fresh new growth buds for analysis with very few leaves, very few stems. So of course, you start seeing hot material quite often, and we would love to be able to help the farmers out on the regulatory side with the testing. But our hands are tied with the regulators in terms of what they choose to sample. So hopefully, with this whole USDA thing, it helps. But we were talking about the roots being, having some properties that could be valuable. And when we're talking about hemp in the first place, it's an entire plant, including the stems, leaves, roots. So I'd like to see sampling move towards including all of those components. I know it'd be a little bit difficult for the roots, but if we're talking about having to destroy crop, I wish the regulators would be a bit more vocal about what's happening.
So I will. So be sure and take your question, and I will say that it's 12 o'clock. So if it's like a university professor. You're welcome to leave. I know that they have lunch and stuff like that, but I'll just stay here until Celeste comes in and gives me this one of the things.
Just a quick question. So in the EPA extraction methods, we've got extraction surrogates to validate what our extraction efficiencies are. Are you using an extraction surrogate to validate your efficiency on extractions for potency?
Like an internal marker? Is that?
Yeah, basically you're putting a surrogate into the sample prior to your extraction.
Make like an internal standard?
Yeah.
No, not an internal standard. It would be a surrogate
Surrogate.
to validate how efficient your extraction
like a standard addition
process was. So, like in EPA
Right.
3550 or whatever method you're doing for extraction of semi-volatiles, you would have a couple of surrogates, and you would need to have at least an efficiency of 70-80% in order for that method to
like
be
a matrix spike.
Like a matrix
yeah,
spike.
yeah. Sure,
Okay.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So are you using one on every extraction to validate your extraction potency?
We are to be, especially to be able to identify issues with injection or peak shift or whatnot. We spike every sample.
But that's at the instrument. What about before extraction to validate your extraction efficiency?
So like at Waters, we would have an oasis, or we would have different sample prep, and so we would look at the sample prep and be able to make sure that what was a plus or minus across the top, that we were gaining those. So he's asking if you're doing the sample prep somewhere along the way that you're using like an oasis or I can't even think of my own products now, and well, they were my products. So being able to make sure that you've done the extraction and you've gotten 99% out, but I can tell the urofin is coming out of you, so go for it.
What I do internally, particularly with like hemp extractions, is I have a control sample that I run. So very early in the process, I have a pretty large batch of hemp that I homogenized, and that gets run with our hemp samples, and it goes through the entire process, and there is an allowable range for that control sample. If that sample, which was run the exact same time, all the same process by the same analyst on the same analytical run, doesn't pass, that's an indicator to me that the analytical run was compromised in some way or another, and there needs to be retesting. But that's what we do, is we have a control sample rather than running a surrogate, as you're calling it, with our samples.
Yeah, I mean, in chemical analysis, we would use a deuterated form of
Right.
one compound or another that we're looking for.
Yes.
I don't know
We're using deuterated materials for our mass spectral methods.
Yeah, some of them are available. Yeah, they're expensive.
They are expensive. So Macrionis, when I went into his office back in 2013, he had all of his patents that he had from all the deuterated. So he owned all the patents on all the deuterated cannabinoids. And he says, well, those aren't all of them. I have the other ones up in my attic, because he was at UConn before he went to Northeastern. And he has 20 prep chemists at Northeastern working with that, and then 2 very large mass spectrometers in the basement. So he was, I mean, he knew exactly what he had for a confirmation. And X-ray also. Go ahead.
And I would say I live in sort of a middle ground of doing internal testing, and then we also require that all of our product goes out for third-party testing. And when we get into the weeds of the analytics, it can get very expensive, especially for processors.
Did you really say get into the weeds?
Yeah. And so I also just sort of want to put a little disclaimer out there when we're talking about purchasing multiple certified reference material standards to compare them, or burden that the average extractor or processor can bear. But these are really great things to bring up with your testing facilities and see if it's an option that they have. And it gives you kind of a toolkit when you're interviewing your third-party testing labs to see what they're doing.
Basically, like, I can easily spend more money than my entire batch of product is worth verifying its quality. So there's a
So thank you for attending, and thank you for everyone for on the panel and all the different comments, and go out and have a great day.